Hello friends, 2023 has seen a virtual explosion of new pickleball paddles. Some major advancements in paddle technology have pushed our sport forward to a degree that I don't think anybody anticipated at the beginning of the year. So I'll be taking an in-depth look at what I believe are the most state-of-the-art, best-performing paddles out there right now, and which paddles take the top spots for 6 categories. This will be a 2-part video series, and in the first part, I'll cover the best control, power, and all-court paddles, and in the second video, I'll cover the best spin paddles, lightweight paddles, and budget options. It's hard to believe that in January of this year, thermoforming wasn't a commonly known word, and the most powerful paddle on the market was the ProKennex Black Ace. I've been fortunate enough to test most of the paddles worth knowing about this year, and I've seen paddle technology come so far in such a short period. Some of the most popular paddles from earlier in the year are now all but obsolete, and there are still others that have stood the test of time and are still great paddles. So today, I want to give you my best picks, broken down by different categories. I don't want to do just a 1 through 5 because, let's be honest, everybody has different needs. Some players prioritize power for top speed and aggressiveness, while others need a control paddle to be that steady player on the court who resets and plays the finesse game. Others want a paddle who does a little of everything, or that's very light and maneuverable for maximum hand speed. And there are many people who are just looking for the best bang for the buck. So I want to give you that answer in this video no matter who you are or what you're looking for in a paddle. And stick around to the end because I'll tell you my personal favorite, and it might surprise you. This video will be a different format from my usual data-rich analytical lens. I'll try to give a high-level overview of all these paddles, some of my favorite features and standout technology, as well as some of the shortcomings. And if you want more details, you can check out my full review for a lot of these paddles. You can also find all of the metrics for these paddles, including spin, dimensions, speed, power, pop, and others, in my paddle database at JohnKewPickleball.com. There's a link to that in the description below. And if you want to buy any of these paddles, you can get the best price by using my affiliate links, also provided in the description below. Using these links also helps this channel by providing a small kickback, which allows me to keep making videos like this. In my opinion, the biggest advancements in 2023 for paddle technology have fallen within the realm of power. I'm using 2 metrics to define a power paddle: power and pop. I've covered these terms in other videos, and Pickleball Will just released a nice video explaining the difference. But briefly, power is the velocity of a ball coming off a paddle with a full swing, so things like serves and drives from the baseline or overhead putaways. Pop, on the other hand, is the velocity that a paddle imparts on a ball with shorter swings, like punch volleys or flicks at the kitchen. Usually a paddle will be better at one or the other, so it might have good power but poor pop, or vice versa. Coming in at number 3 on my top 3 list for power paddles is the ProDrive Ghost. ProDrive's innovative use of Kevlar in the core of a thermoformed paddle has created a paddle that rips power shots and has a good amount of pop. It's a hybrid-shaped paddle, so you get enough length for leverage and power without adding too much swing weight. This paddle hits very hard, falling at the 86th percentile for power, based on serve speed measured with a radar gun. Pop is good too at the 69th percentile. The sweet spot is forgiving, and it's at about the average for hybrid-shaped thermoformed paddles. And they're using raw carbon fiber for this paddle, which gets good spin, and I measured it on this paddle at 1800 RPM, placing it in the high spin category. The drawbacks of this paddle, in my opinion, are the harsh, brittle feeling of the Kevlar core and the loud sound when striking the ball. This won't appeal to people who prefer a more plush feel in a paddle, but adding lead tape can mute this brittle feel and also mute the loud sound of the paddle, and it further increases the paddle's power. My second choice for the power paddle category is the Electrum Model E Elite. This paddle really wasn't known as a power paddle when it first came out earlier this year, but Electrum reconfigured it, replacing the graphene face with raw carbon fiber, and the new version hits big. Being thermoformed, the Elite hits much harder than its predecessor, the original Model E. And for power, the Elite falls at the 91st percentile in my database, falling just under the new Gearbox Pro paddles. And the pop for this paddle is also top tier, falling at the 90th percentile. It's actually rare for a paddle to possess both top tier power and pop, but the Electrum Model E Elite has both in spades. It also has an oversized sweet spot given the longer paddle face and the large twist weight. That extra long paddle face does cut into the handle length though, which can be a bit on the small side for those of us who want two-handed backhands. The extra long paddle face also boosts the swing weight, so this paddle can feel a bit sluggish, especially for people coming from ultra lightweight paddles. The last thing I wanted to mention about this paddle is its top tier spin, which averages just above 2,000 RPM. And you'll need all this spin to shape the ball into the court given the velocity that it comes off this paddle. Despite a fair amount of controversy over quality control issues since its release, I'd be remiss not to include the Gearbox Pro Series in this category, given that it's the hardest hitting paddle of the year by far. Putting this paddle at the number 1 spot for power paddles comes with a big caveat though, because as I said, there have been some concerning QC issues that I'll cover in a minute. So for now, I would actually recommend holding off on buying these paddles until it's clear that all potential issues have been resolved. The Gearbox Pro Series burst onto the scene just over a month ago, making a huge splash. The power versions of the Pro Series hit nearly as hard as EVA foam paddles, which aren't even legal for tournament play. So the Pro Series provided a legal option for people wanting maximum speed and power. And while there is a trade-off with control, it's not as severe as with other power paddles. And there's a softer feel on these paddles that makes them easier to control. But I can't recommend these paddles without reservation because, as I mentioned before, there were some quality control issues after their release, which is very unlike Gearbox, which up to now has had an unblemished reputation for quality. The main issues I've heard about from others are dimples on the paddle surface, weight variation up to ½ an ounce, and cracking of the surface along the edge. There were also concerns from some buyers that the power wasn't there as advertised, but I've tested a few and I've heard from others like Chris Olson, who's tested several, and all of our samples hit harder than any other legal paddles, especially after a short break-in period. There's also concern that this break-in period might actually cause the paddle to go out of spec, so similar to core corruption or disc bonding, but this is unverified. And the last caveat that I want to mention is that there's a chance that this paddle could lose its USAP approval for tournament play, or maybe just get banned at the pro level if influential pros start complaining about an unfair advantage or changing the nature of the sport. In the same vein, if the PPA gets around to replacing their current deflection test with a coefficient of restitution test, which measures the velocity of a ball before and after colliding with a paddle, then there's a possibility that the Gearbox Pro Power might get axed, because it's that powerful. All that being said, the 2 units I have of the Gearbox Pro Power and the 2 others I've played with are all the best power paddles I've ever hit, so this list wouldn't be complete without them. If you do eventually get one of these, I'd recommend the power version over the control because the control paddles are just slightly diluted versions of the power. And the whole reason for getting these paddles, in my opinion, is for the power. They sit at the top of my chart for power and are in 2nd and 3rd place for pop. They also get great spin, and as I mentioned, they have manageable control considering their power. To me, the sweet spot feels large on these, particularly on the elongated model, but others have mentioned that the sweet spot feels average to them. I do recommend a small amount of lead tape, about a ½ ounce total, at the 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock positions to broaden the sweet spot and increase stability. Okay, before we move on to control paddles, I have an honorable mention in the power category, the bread and butter Filth. This paddle is a rectangular, elongated design that's thermoformed and provides both good power and pop, which, as I've mentioned, is a rare combination. It also gets good spin and has a great looking design. This paddle has the same shape and plays nearly the same as the Carbon 1X, which I also really enjoy playing, but I couldn't add it to my best of list because Carbon's issues with delamination, disc bonding, and core corruption on their thermoform paddles have persisted longer than most other paddle companies besides Legacy. Anyway, the bread and butter Filth not only performs great as a power paddle, but it's also more durable and cheaper than many other brands out there. I'm going to make a prediction for next year that we'll see the pendulum swing from power paddles to control paddles. 2023 seemed like an arms race for more speed and power, and I feel like most players out there right now would benefit from a paddle that doesn't hit as hard but has better touch and control. So while there were far fewer control paddles released this year, let's take a look at my 3 favorites. For control paddles, third place goes to the Vatic Prism Flash. This paddle is actually in my top 3 for 2 categories, control and budget paddles. So I'll cover it in more detail later in the budget section, but in terms of control, the combination of a plush-feeling face, extra-large sweet spot, and top-tier spin make this paddle one of the absolute best for drops, dinks, resets, and anything requiring finesse. Second place goes to the Joola Scorpeus 16mm Colin Johns paddle. The extra width built into this paddle adds twist weight, giving it a more forgiving sweet spot. The Scorpeus also feels more forgiving in terms of pop-ups than other thermoform paddles and excels in the soft game. But with that, there's a trade-off in power, and the Scorpeus power ranking falls at only the 21st percentile. It has noticeably more pop though, coming in at the 36th percentile. Also, it has a low swing weight, which helps with hand speed during those fast kitchen exchanges. Lastly, my spin testing of the Scorpeus places it within the high spin category, which helps it to shape the ball and adds to its control potential. And if you want more hand speed and pop, go for the 14mm Anna Bright Signature Scorpeus. My top pick for the best control paddle of 2023 is the new Selkirk Luxx Control Air. I've heard nothing but good things from people who have this paddle, and after playing with it myself, I agree that it takes the cake for this year's best control paddle. Its ultra-thick core feels very soft and forgiving, and its top-tier spin helps shape the ball, giving this paddle even more control. One caveat about the spin, Selkirk is using a grit texture, which tends to wear down quicker than raw carbon fiber or peel ply textures. It seems to be the same grit texture used on the Selkirk Power Air, and my Power Air showed significant smoothing and wear after only a month of use. But maybe my playstyle wears down the texture more quickly because I know others who've played with the Power Air for months and aren't complaining about the spin or the texture. I tested the Invicta Luxe model, which is the elongated version, and to me, the sweet spot is just okay, but is easily improved with lead tape at the 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock positions. This arrangement doesn't add much to the swing weight, but spreads out the sweet spot laterally, helping with drops, resets, and dinks. It also gives the paddle a bit more power, which is very low in its stock form at only the 8th percentile. If you like standard square paddles and shorter handles, I'd recommend the Epic or S2 shapes, which have a built-in wider sweet spot. The Luxx is a great choice for people who want to minimize pop-ups and who need a boost in their control game. I found drops and resets to be easier with this paddle than any other I've played with recently, and I had more confidence at the kitchen to stay patient and keep playing the soft game until getting a high ball to attack. This helped me make smarter choices rather than the common tendency of rushing to attack with a power paddle. The all-court paddle is a term coined by Braden at Pickleball Effect to refer to paddles that strike a good balance along the power and control spectrum. So while they don't typically excel at one or the other, there's enough power for hard drives or serves from the baseline and enough control for resets through the transition zone and the soft game at the kitchen. My number 3 pick for the all-court paddle category is the Ronbus R3 NOVA. Ronbus released its NOVA line earlier this summer, which uses an edge grid system to fix the issues of disc bonding and core corruption that were plaguing thermoform paddles earlier in the year. They also experimented with the orientation and density of the carbon fiber in the edge grid with the goal of creating a paddle that adapts to the level of force when the paddle hits the ball so that the grid remains softer for light shots like dinks and then stiffens up for power shots. After playing with this paddle, I'd say that it leans more toward a power paddle, but it does seem to soften up a bit in the finesse game, placing this paddle squarely in the all-court category. The swing weight is above average, which is typical for elongated paddles, but it falls on the lighter end of elongated paddles, so hand speed is not compromised to the extent that you see for other paddles using the same shape. The sweet spot is about average for thermoformed elongated paddles, which is to say that it's larger than Gen 1 paddles and follows the shape of the paddle in being longer than it is wide. Overall, this paddle is a really good choice for people who prefer an elongated shape and who want an all-court paddle that trends toward the power side of the spectrum. And if you're looking for more hand speed, go for the R3 NOVA, which uses a hybrid shape. My number 2 spot for all-court paddles goes to the 6-0 Double Black Diamond. This paddle absolutely exploded onto the scene early this year, and it's remained one of 2023's most popular paddles. And for good reason. It combines several features that make it one of the best all-around paddles that I've ever used. It has top-tier spin, an extra-large sweet spot, a lower swing weight for good hand speed, ample control, and enough power to put the ball away. So even though it's advertised as a control paddle, I feel comfortable including it in the all-court category. The dimensions of this paddle seem to hit the right balance for most players. Something about its hybrid shape that flares out toward the top just gives this paddle a great feel in its stock form. In my opinion, this paddle leans more toward the control side of the spectrum, so it's great for people who want enough power and pop to feel confident with speed-ups and putaways, but really don't want to steer too far away from the fundamentals, so drops, resets, dinks, and the soft game. My number 1 pick for an all-court paddle is the Pickleball Apes Pro Line Energy. This won't come as a surprise for those of you who have been following my channel for the past few months, because this has been my primary paddle for most of the summer and fall. Apes was one of the first companies to incorporate Kevlar into the paddle face. The Pro Line Energy uses a hybrid Kevlar carbon fiber twill weave that gives this paddle some unique qualities. Kevlar has fantastic impact resistance and vibration damping, so the paddle combines durability with a plush feel, but still delivers plenty of power. Its power rating falls at the 75th percentile, and pop comes in at the 64th percentile, so this paddle definitely skews toward the power side of the spectrum. But the control is there too, especially with the more muted feel that the Kevlar provides. The original Pro Line Energy is ultra elongated with an oversized handle that's great for two-handed backhands. And if you prefer a more standard paddle shape, Apes recently released the Pro Line Energy S, which is more of a hybrid shape with the same Kevlar carbon fiber face. The spin on these paddles is top tier too, and they come at a great price point. So this is a great option for an all-court paddle that leans into the power space and is also budget friendly. So there you have it. That covers our first 3 categories. Be sure to tune into part 2 of this series, which covers the remaining 3: spin, lightweight, and budget paddles. Also, I'll introduce my new personal favorite paddle in part 2.